Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our host an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers beat the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun.
Okay, well, we are really lucky today to be joined by Dawn Meyerriecks. Dawn, thank you very much for joining us today on CSI Chat. We very much appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to this.
Oh, you're welcome. So Dawn's background is frankly beyond impressive. If you have an interest in technology, you're probably going to be blown away by Dawn's background. Now, I'm going to do her a disservice by trying to compress this down so we don't lose up the whole 90 minutes talking about her background. But here's just a small sample of what of some of the experiences Dawn has had working. So she started as a project manager at the NASA Propulsion Laboratory. She worked as the Chief Technology Officer at the Defense Information Systems Agency. She was a senior VP at AOL Product Technology. So she's got a bit of a unique background where she's worked both government and non-government in very, very senior positions. She was Assistant Director of the National Intelligence for Acquisition, Technology, and Facility. And most recently, and where she spent a good chunk of her career, and we'll probably spend most of the time talking about, is that she was the Deputy Director of the CIA for Science and Technology. How did I come across Dawn? I came across Dawn because I'm a subscriber to Masterclass. Dawn, along with two of her colleagues, put together a terrific masterclass called The Art of Intelligence. And I would highly recommend you take a watch of that. I watched it. I then started Googling Dawn and reached out, and for some strange reason, she said yes. So we're very, very, very lucky. So what I'm going to try and do is simplify Dawn's background down, and there's probably two ways to do that. Number one, if you're a James Bond fan out there, you've probably heard of the character Q. Now, you might have thought that this was a fictional character. Apparently, it is not a fictional character. The character's name, it's actually not a male, it's a female, and her name is Dawn. And she formerly worked at the CIA because Dawn was referred to as the Q of the CIA, which again is pretty high praise. That would be one way. The other way to try and simplify this down is that normally when I've had guests on in the past and I ask a question and they don't want to answer it, they might respond with, "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." Now, again, in most of the cases, I would take that as a joke. But in the case of Dawn, I think there might be a little bit more seriousness to that particular comment, given her background with the CIA. So I need to take a little bit more caution asking Dawn questions than maybe I otherwise would have with some other guests. However, I've never actually interviewed somebody from the CIA before, Dawn. You're actually the first one. So there's a couple of questions.
Great.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions that I've been dying to ask you, actually.
Okay.
And let's just call them bucket one or bucket two questions. Bucket one question would be a question I give you where the answer you coming back was, look, if I told you, I'd have to kill you. And if that's the case, I'm fine with not knowing the answer. Okay.
Fair enough.
Bucket two would be, Scott, I would be happy to answer the question. And then you could provide your response. Okay. So bucket one or bucket two. Now there's two questions I would like to ask you. So when I was preparing for this, one of the folks I came across was Michael Morrell, one of your colleagues who also did the masterclass alongside you. I was watching an interview that Michael was giving, and he stated on a panel, and Dawn, I quote this. This is a direct quote from your colleague. He says, this is from Michael: "If the general public knew what I knew, the general public wouldn't turn on their toaster in the morning." That's an exact quote from your colleague, Michael. So maybe you could clarify if that is a bucket one or bucket two question. And if it's bucket two, could you provide an answer? Why is Michael concerned about even turning on his toaster in the morning?
So yeah, I think it's a bucket two question. I think I can safely answer that. So everybody's aware of the Israelis and the pagers story. So think about that application to any smart appliance. There's no reason that, it can't be exploited. If it's got digital innards, it can be exploited. And I will confess that not being much of a cook, I have personally caught my toaster on fire, even a dumb toaster. So should always have a healthy respect for those toasting appliances.
Got it. Okay. Okay. There we go. We got through the first question. So the second question, the second question requires a little bit of a background. So, one of our earlier interviews was with a guy by the name of Mark Eglinton. Mark wrote a book about John McAfee. John McAfee was a technology entrepreneur. He founded McAfee antivirus software, and John obviously did quite well with McAfee antivirus software. And then he kind of went off rogue a little bit. He sold his interest in McAfee antivirus software, and then he kind of went off the beaten path, let's say, a little bit. John had a number of claims, but one of the issues he had was with respect to income taxes. John's quote was, he thought the paying of income taxes was illegal. He thought that nobody should have to pay income taxes. And his quote was, "I've paid over $50 million in taxes. I have not received $50 million in services." That is apparently his rationale. But then what he did is he took it a step further, and then he would go around the globe basically teaching people how to use crypto and not pay taxes. What John then claimed was that this thing got the interest of the CIA. So John had claimed that the CIA was following him, that the CIA was trying to catch him. John made a number of claims about the CIA. He had thought that they have all these satellites in the air. I think at one point he said they track every car and every boat on planet Earth. They can spot a license plate from, way up in outer space. Made a number of claims. However, one of his claims was actually very complimentary to the CIA, and he was using this as a point to show actually how sophisticated and how smart the folks in the CIA were. And what John had said, so again, this is a direct quote when he's actually complimenting the CIA in this in this quote. He said, "There are CIA agents who can speak 35 different languages fluently without an accent." Now, Dawn, if even 50% of that statement is true, that is beyond impressive, because again, I'm lucky enough I can barely get through the English language, never mind 35 different languages fluently without an accent. So is that bucket one or bucket two? And if it's a bucket two question, is that actually true? Are there CIA agents out there who can actually speak 35 different languages fluently without an accent?
So I think that's a bucket two. I can answer that one.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So look, CIA does absolutely screen people coming in for their ability to speak multiple languages, but also their ability to learn language and how facile you are with that. And I will confess that I am not one of those people. I am learning French with Duolingo the hard way. So it doesn't preclude you getting hired at CIA, but they do check for that on the way in. And if you're good at it, what then they want to make sure is that you get to exercise those skills on behalf of the nation and national security, and make sure that you end up in a career path where that's something that's important. But
I see.
I don't know anybody who actually had 35 languages, although I will say that I knew a lot of people that I would call language or linguistic savants. They could speak multiple languages and they spoke them really well. So one of my case officer buddies spoke both Mandarin and Russian and Farsi, and then a bunch of Romance languages. So he wasn't quite to 35, but if you know anything about languages, those are very, very, very different. And he wasn't alone in that ability.
Wow. Yeah, that certainly is impressive. So let's go back to the beginning, the start of your professional career. You started at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So how did you end up? Why did you start here? How did your career start at NASA?
Yeah, thanks. So I actually did my undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon, and then when I graduated, I wanted to get as far away from the Eastern Seaboard as possible. Not that Pittsburgh's on the Eastern Seaboard. So I actually went to work for TRW initially, which is part of Northrop Grumman. And I have to just tell a story on that. I am old enough that we were putting in the first local area network at a command and control center for the Air Force. And we were using copper pipes that were probably, 5 inches in diameter. And that's when bend radius actually meant something, because if you bent it too far, you stressed it and the throughput would decrease as a result of that. And we were talking about, like bits of throughput, not even megabits, maybe kilobits of throughput. So that was my first job. And
Wow.
I actually got my
Great.
master's while I was there. Um, but it turns out that it was a hard time at JPL for a variety of reasons. We're going to talk about that a little bit. But they needed people with clearances because the way they kept the lights on was they were given a system to develop that did tactical communications for the Army and the Air Force, because people were like, wow, Deep Space Network, that's tactical comms, on a kind of interplanetary scale. You guys should be able to figure this out. Needless to say, a lot of different skill sets, but that was the concept. And it was a way to keep the lab going when there was a big emphasis on manned space as opposed to unmanned space, which is where JPL lives.
Okay.
So I ended up at JPL doing work for them because I had a clearance and working on communication systems. So
So
that's how I ended up there. Yeah.
now what I learned, Dawn, is that you were, when I was checking the dates and things like that, what I learned is that you were actually at NASA during the Challenger
Mm,
disaster. And
yeah.
one of our previous guests that we had on a few months ago, Adam Higginbotham, wrote an entire book about the Challenger disaster and went through it in quite a bit of detail. So many of our listeners would actually have an understanding of what happened. Um, give us your experience of, because you were there. You were like
Yeah.
we talked about earlier before we started. You were in the cafeteria when
Yeah.
when the Challenger took off. Give us your experience of that particular day. How did that go down for you?
Yeah. So it was a big thing, anytime there was a NASA launch of any sort, we all, and it's kind of across all the NASA centers that, the employees, everybody who could would gather in the cafeteria or in the conference center and watch the launch, because these are, seminal events. And it's,
Absolutely.
that either your team put a lot of work into getting it there or a team like you someplace else in the family. So, and we had watched a number of these launches in general, but also the space shuttle in particular. And um, as we were watching when the anomaly occurred, as NASA likes to call it, our stomachs all sank. It
Yeah.
was like this, something really wrong has happened here, right? And of course, whenever the launch lead gets quiet for long periods of time, that's also not a good sign, right? So if you're listening to NASA do launches, and I still live stream some of the launches, long periods of silence are generally bad things.
Yep.
So we knew, and I'll say what happened as a result of that is NASA had always been really, really good at Tiger teams. So there was a lot of self-reflection and self-evaluation in terms of, making sure that we didn't sacrifice quality, that we listened to engineers, that there were ombuds that you could take if you were concerned about something, that you were kind of out of your chain of command if you were really concerned about something, so you could impact and make sure that those criteria got evaluated separately and by experts that didn't have a stake in the schedule or whatever.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about before we started. It's so hard to get on a launch schedule. And particularly when you're trying to, get to a particular point in space. For those of us that know anything about geometry or space, you only have certain launch windows, and there's such a backlog to get things launched that if you get out of that line,
Yep.
it can literally take years to get back in the line. So there's a lot of pressure, but we did a whole lot of self-evaluation, and I think became stronger as a result of it. Unfortunately, we lost those astronauts and that crew under the circumstances. And that's always, that's the last place an engineer or scientist wants to be, I'll say. That's what none of us signed up for that, right? So,
And do you think part of it is, hindsight is 2020? Like, these are such complicated endeavors, taking a space shuttle from, ground zero all the way up, into an incredibly complicated, difficult environment. So many pieces and parts have to go perfect. I can imagine if one little thing goes wrong, everything can fall apart. It was a bad day in Florida that day. It was freezing cold. Might have been the
yeah.
coldest day in history in Florida on that particular day. Do you think some of it is hindsight is 2020, or do you think, that there were actually some major changes that were made as a result of that issue?
Well, I think it's both are true, right? Hindsight
Yeah.
is 2020. And if you don't learn from that, shame on you. I mean,
Yep.
that's, never let an accident go to waste. There's a lot to learn from that. And I'll say from, my own personal experience, in one way, it was a proving ground, or at least an intellectual proving ground for work that I later did at CIA in particular, because our officers, my officers at the time, um, actually do their own work. So if you're installing a particularly sensitive technical collector someplace where you have no business being, and those things did occur, sometimes we couldn't make them case officer proof, right? It was sensitive and we had to make sure it got, installed correctly, and all of
Yep.
those sorts of things that you actually took into account. And of course, the easy thing to overlook is environmentals of any kind,
Yep.
culturally, weather, sandstorms, wherever it is. And so I think that left a long-term imprint on me in terms of thinking about not just the thing and what you were trying to collect, but the environment in which it had to operate, sometimes for long, long periods of time. And then, of course, we didn't want anybody to notice it. So there, you added all of those things in. But I think that really helped me think about, and we instituted, for example, ombuds and tiger teams and things like that, and cross-disciplinary reviews when I was at S&T for those things that we were taking high risk, but could have high payoff.
I see. Yeah, like even today, you watch a SpaceX take off, and man, there's still like it is
Oh,
an
yeah.
engineering
Incredible.
marvel watching, watching those, and you just wonder, man, like the amount of testing and everything like that that's got to go on to make sure that happens perfectly on that day at that particular
Yeah.
time is no, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable. It's
I
unbelievable.
got to be a VIP on a Tiger cruise, or a workup cruise for the Abe Lincoln years ago.
Oh
And the
yeah,
same thing, watching flight ops on an aircraft carrier is just like, it's amazing. Same thing,
yeah,
right? We have systems that are so very complex, space launch being one, but lots of examples of these. And we take it for granted that it's just going to work. And then we're shocked when it doesn't, right? And that what I used to tell my folks is, yes, I know we've done this before, but we're going to scrub it again, just because, that one thing that we haven't thought about will be the thing that shows up if we don't go through it.
yeah. So you bring up an aircraft carrier. What I'd heard one time was a plane landing on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the night in pitch black might be one of the most dangerous things that we do. As in terms of like engineering marvels, the fact that that plane can land in pitch black on that postage stamp, that aircraft carrier
Yeah,
going at that speed, that is an incredible feat of technology or engineering ingenuity in order to make that happen.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've been to the Panama Canal. Oh my
No.
goodness. Right. That's amazing. I got to tour a boomer once, the nuclear ballistic missile sub. Um,
Wow.
un, Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's just, and it also makes you think as an engineer or scientist, wow, look at what we're capable of. Right. We have engineering marvels in our lives every day.
Yeah. I totally agree. Um, so the next stop then was the Chief Technology Officer of Defense Information Systems Agency. Maybe you give us some perspective on what that involved.
Sure. The government started something called an Intergovernmental Personnel Act, and that was to bring experts into government to help with things like technology or whatever, right? In my
Yep.
case, I was the first IPA that exercised that, and I went to work for the Army because they were having trouble with a command and control system that was years behind schedule. Um, and I had been doing work for the Army, doing command and control kinds of things when I was at JPL. So I came to the attention of a program manager, and we delivered on time and under budget, which never happens. And so he was like, "Dawn, can you come help me with this?" So it is it's a non-for-profit kind of setup. They still exist. And it was the right point in my life to say, sure, because partly when I was at JPL, I thought, these are smart people that I'm working for in the government. But sometimes we get direction that makes zero sense to me.
Yep.
And so part of it was like, okay, so I want to be closer to this to understand why what I think are completely smart, rational people are telling me to go, right instead of left. So this was that opportunity. So I moved back to DC, went to work for him. We did get the system fielded. And that was a lot about, again, understanding the technology deeply enough to help ask the right questions in order for the contractor to figure out what was wrong. But I came to the attention of the J6 for DIS at the time, which is the communications, normally compute communications cell in a command structure in the US. And he couldn't figure out how the Army had actually managed to ever field anything. He was flummoxed about that. And he loved the fact that my husband is a naval officer. So he's like, come work for me. So that's how I ended up at DISA as their CTO. But again, I built command and control. That's why I got to do this cruise, is he made a bet with me that I couldn't get operationally evaluated as successful the first time out on board ship. So they were running
I see.
one of the systems that I built. And I said, so what do I get if I win? And he said, well, I'll make sure you're a VIP on a workup cruise on a carrier. And so, by gosh, we were going to get it done. So I got to do that. That was the
Wow.
bet. And and then from there, because we had managed to do that and kind of exceeded expectations, when the CTO became a thing. And I'm a normal integrator. I mean, I just like the systems engineering problems and combining multiple expertise. And I'm not above calling somebody and groveling and saying, I have this big problem. I think you have the expertise. Could you come help us? I know, I'll give you a charge code. I know this is not your day job, but could you help?
Yep.
And so that's how I ended up being the CTO for DISA. And if you think about them, what they really are is sort of the cloud providers, but years and years ago, right? We're talking like this was the 90s, before cloud was really a thing. And that's, I was working with our data centers and our long haul to try and enable a service-based infrastructure that could be applied. And one of the things that I did there was did the first enterprise buy
Okay.
for the department. And it was Netscape, because we needed PKI certs because all of our web servers were completely open. And I got to know the guys at Netscape really well, including Mark Andreessen. And we based our progress payments to them on the enterprise license, based on whether or not they could get to 2 million certs issued, and it would break at 40,000, and then it would break at 400,000 and things like that. And so I got to know that team really well, because my job was, I had to demonstrate to my director, who was a 3-star, that we could issue 2 million certs from the moment that we went into operation, because there were so many websites that were completely open.
I see.
And so we helped the Netscape team, actually debug their certificate server. And they got paid. And that's when all the, so, you can blame me for the mess that's out there right now that is in the process of being, revamped. But at the time, it was completely open. So it was a better answer.
Yeah, that's definitely a blast from the past. Netscape. It's been a while since I've heard that term. So
I'm just old.
yeah, you and me both. So then you have a bit of a unique turn in your career, where you had spent a large chunk of your career in government, and then you choose to go to you chose to leave the government and you go into the private sector, and you go be a VP at AOL. What was kind of the rationale or the thinking behind leaving government, going into non-government?
So I told you I was building command and control systems for government, and we were able to, for example, get upgrades out to the field, because it was a service-based infrastructure, in a matter of days. So we would get updates to, security patches for operating systems or something, and we could validate that and get them out. And, got really good at, like, CENTCOM would call and say, hey, I need this new capability. We're about to do XYZ. Can you get me something? And, we put it on a contract, get it validated, and send it out. So the next generation of that system was about to be, a major revamp of that system, because the technology had changed. And so I got the first milestone A that the Department of Defense ever granted. And this is part of the formal acquisition process that DoD goes through. And so they had invented this milestone A, which was supposed to validate that the requirements were doable in the time and the budget that were allowed. So I got that, which means probably the program could never be killed, honestly. But I thought, it's going to take 10 years to field this, because of all of the people that are going to get to vote on it. And that's maybe overstating for effect, but it was going to be a long time, because of feeding the beast, mostly, not because the technology didn't exist and all of that, but just, the transition time for something of that magnitude. And as I mentioned, we had done this baselining. Netscape had been acquired by AOL. So the baselining that we had done, I got to know the product manager at AOL, the guy who ran product tech. And I had called him in and said, I just spent a bunch of taxpayer money, and you're not a consumer products kind of company. What are you doing? What are we going to do about this? Right. So he loved the fact that I was forthright about that. I did some other things. We actually put, we put security, we helped put security into AIM because we were going to use it downrange. This is also when the IED thing was happening, and we could see people going through intersections and knowing that there was something there because we could see people there in the intersection. So we got secure AIM going, so we could at least get an SMS to the leader to say, hey, drive around that intersection, right?
Yep.
So I had come to his attention for a variety of reasons, and he said to me, he had been bugging me to come work for him to do product strategy. And so when I got my milestone A, I literally called him that afternoon and said, okay, I'm ready to interview. And he was like, what? Okay, 2 days. And so I went and interviewed, and I needed to replant myself. I needed to learn some more things. I wanted to go fast and understand scale because the government's really hard to go fast in. We did scale okay, but fast was not in the vocabulary, even for us who had been
Yep.
doing updates pretty regularly. A major system upgrade, I was just like, I'll be halfway through my career by the time we get this done.
Yep.
So yeah, it was an opportunity, and I went to AOL to run product strategy.
So you spend some time at AOL, and then you make the decision to come back into government. So what? Maybe just explain, close that loop. Is what got you back into the government at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I did 3 layoffs at AOL in 2 years. I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And eventually I invoked my goodbye kiss clause in my contract. And because I was so tired, I love people. It just took a lot out of me.
Yep.
Um, and so I decided I needed a break because I wasn't even sure I liked technology anymore. And I thought I love technology. So I just was like, I'm burned out, right? I need to
Yep.
take a break. So in the course of that, Dennis Blair, who had been a PACOM commander that I had actually worked with, I had met him when I was putting that system I built at JPL into his command center when he was at PACOM. He was the DNI, and he called me and he said, I want you to consider coming back to government and running my acquisition oversight for me. And I laughed. I was consulting, I was managing my own schedule. And the problem is that Denny Blair is just such a stand-up guy, and he's so smart. And he was like, Dawn, you can fix this, right? If
Yeah.
anybody can fix this, you can fix this. And it was like, he's pressing all the buttons, right? So I interviewed with all the heads of the agency that built things, and they were wonderful people, and they were really excited. And I did have one of them. It was a funny story. When I was interviewing, he said, you've had a fabulous career. Why would you want to screw it up with this job? And it was like, this job is going to be horrible. Why do you want it? I was like, because I think I can make it less horrible for everybody involved, right? Like, I want to deliver capability to mission. My job is not to stop you. My job is to make you successful. So of course, everybody was like, yeah, get her. So it was really because I loved, Admiral Blair. And I really loved the people that I interviewed with. And I thought this, it's kind of a technologist, playground.
Yeah.
They do everything. They do maritime, the whole way to space. It just covers the whole waterfront. And so I thought this would be really challenging, but it would also be really, really interesting from a technology perspective.
So maybe now just give us a little bit of background for those who maybe aren't as familiar with the CIA, or maybe we get all of our news or information about the CIA from movies. Give us a little bit of background on as someone who spent a good chunk of their career at the CIA. Give the layman's person's perspective on what the role of the CIA is, both call it in the United States and on a global scale.
Yeah. So the CIA does 3 things. It does collector of last resort, which is what humans is, but it's also what the S&T did, right? It writes most of the president's daily briefs. There's a big analytic arm that spends a lot of time studying like leaders and the indications, and tries to assess, how's this conversation going to go?
Yep.
What are their equities? Like, what's the likelihood that they will raise this, right? All of those things to help our leadership figure out kind of, what cards to play and when at negotiating tables. But also, is it likely that Syria will actually build chemical weapons and then use them on their own population? Those kind of horrible questions that somebody has
Yep.
to think about. And then the third thing is covert action. And so what I tell people about the first 2 is that it's sort of, if you think about competitive intelligence, that's a big part of what CIA does, but it does it for the national equities, right? And most people in business get that in about 2.5 minutes, right? And they, competitive intelligence was part of my portfolio at AOL. Like if you hired somebody from, I'm trying to think, Yahoo at the time, right, was one of the
Yep.
big competitors. Um, and when they came to work, one of the things is like, well, how would you think about that, right? And you could glean how Yahoo thought about things. We didn't ever say to them, how does Yahoo do that, right? But
Yep.
just because that's who they brought, because that's their person, right? You
Yep.
could learn a lot about how your competitors thought about things. And you could learn a lot about the technology that, people were considering. And at the end of the day, I know it sounds, silly, but it is actually a fairly small community that are the top technologists. And you do talk to each other. There are reasons to get together and just,
Yep.
and that's without giving up IP. It's more like, how are you thinking about this? Or,
Yep.
and it could be anything. It could be about hiring. It could, whatever, right? It's just, again, that community. So it was that competitive intelligence piece that I spent the preponderance of my time on, from enabling both the human piece, but also the collection. And then we spent a lot of time. One of my good friends was the head of the analytic arm, saying to them, okay, so you have medium confidence in this, right? You have medium confidence that Syria is going to use these weapons on their own population. What would it take? What would I have to collect to change that to high confidence, right? How can we go to leadership with as high confidence as possible? Or there was also low confidence assessments. And then we'd have those conversations. What would you need in
Yep.
order to change this assessment from low to medium or low to high? And so it was that constant conversation on the course, because a lot of it, almost all of it, was technology enabled. It was really important to understand that. And of course, I love that, right? My
Yep.
goal as a young engineer was to build things that matter. And so I knew I was building things that not I wasn't anymore, but my team was building things that matter.
So when I kicked off the interview, I referred to, and I think you've been referred to as the Q of the CIA. The official title of that is the Deputy Director of CIA for Science and Technology. Give us some perspective on, from a layman's side. What does that role involve? What's a typical day in the life of the Deputy Director of CIA for Science and Technology?
Yeah, I love the job and I love the people in the job. So our responsibility was, one of my deputies used to say, make up the spacecraft and everything in between. So if you're a little ADD, which maybe I am, I don't know, I would go and I literally spent my day almost always in meeting after meeting after meeting. And then my thought time was at, after 5 o'clock at night. But it was one of those all-consuming jobs that I loved. So I would have a meeting, for example, with like a world famous puppeteer that was working on masks for an hour. And we would talk about what was needed. And I'll just, how would you change this person's appearance so that they look like a native, independent of where they come from. And those were fascinating conversations, because it was a world-class expert. Like, this person had forgotten more about, puppeteering and faces
Yeah.
than most people will ever know, right? Because we recruited those folks. And then the next meeting would be about, an upcoming launch that we were planning for, right? And I would have that conversation about, okay, how's the collector, what kind of capabilities, or whatever. A lot of the meetings were roll up your sleeves, kinds of, hey boss, everything's going well except this yellow light is flashing on my dashboard. I just want you to be aware, because we tried to. It's like more important to get it out than to hide it. And then and this is back to we can get somebody with expertise, right?
Yep.
So if there's a problem in terms of whatever technology, like a seal or something, then we could absolutely find somebody maybe in a different domain that had done a lot of work on seals. And that's, CIA kind of, we laugh and say there's one of everyone, or one of everything, right?
Yep.
So the day in the life of was, and so I went from meeting to meeting to meeting, and then you throw in, I did a lot of work with liaison, right? There's a lot of, I think people don't recognize how much work, particularly at that level of the organization, that we do in partnership. There are people that have better accesses or a lower profile than Americans. Canadians might be one.
Yep.
Where they are just given access in a way that, if an American showed up, they wouldn't even be allowed in the country, right? And so we did a lot of work that was that. So I did a lot of outreach. I did a lot of outreach inside of the US. SOCOM does a lot of interesting things, and we did a lot of work with special forces. So that was something that we leveraged, and a lot of work, frankly, with the rest of the intelligence community. I did a lot of work with NSA and their operations organization. So it was every day was a different, like, choose your own adventure. It wasn't, I didn't get to choose it. It was chosen for me. Right. Um, but I had a great team that their whole job was to prep me and make sure that I had, on my day book, the list of things. And every night at 5, my think time, they would come in with my book for the next day.
Wow.
And any big meetings we had going on, coming up, we'd go through and they'd show me what they had. And I'd like, yeah, that's fine. I don't need a bio for this person. I've met them before, kind of stuff. Right. So it was very orchestrated. And then in the moment, you were doing each meeting kind of as it came, and being totally engaged. So I loved it. I completely thrived in that environment. And I had the benefit of, I worked for amazing people that were not micromanagers. And so they would be, oh, okay, Dawn, if that's what you think we need to do. And there were times when I would go say to them, there's no way we can do this. And they would say, try. And I'm like, okay. And if we didn't make it, as long as they knew, right? I mean, sometimes they gave me, they gave us schedules that were like, you have to have cold fusion done by Tuesday. It's like, okay, boss, we're about going to laugh now. And then I'm going to tell you what I think is actually going to happen. But my gosh, we'll give it everything we got. But there were those moments, and I called them my hold my beer moments, where people would say, you can't possibly do that. And it would be like, all right, get the team together. We got to get this done. This is important. And when those paid off, and they did more of the time than not, surprisingly successful. It was those phenomenal, like, once in a lifetime, treats, where it's like, someday they're going to declassify this and my grandkids are going to say, Grandma, did you know that? And there were other times when we screwed up and people were, where we failed. And when that happened, we would go through a tiger team process, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would you describe the average person in the CIA? Again, most of us who are listening probably get our information from movies and television shows about CIA employees. But I would guess that a lot of the folks at the CIA are just average people who have expressed an interest in, maybe they're, maybe more patriotic than perhaps another person who chose to go into industry to spend their career. Is there one or two characteristics that you would describe as being, most closely affiliated to a CIA employee?
Yeah, I think the number one, and you hit the nail on the head, is just patriots. We are all huge believers in this great experiment called liberal democracy.
Yep.
And are very committed to, seeing that persist.
Yep.
For our kids and our grandkids. And so that's a big piece of what brings us to work every day, and actually doing things. CIA is made up of a bunch of doers. It's like Katie bar the door when the bit's in the mouth. And we have legal controls and all of those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, everybody could roll up their sleeves. And I think another big part is the appreciation for differences and diversity. And what I mean by that is, what the case officers could do. I told my buddy one time, my counterpart who ran the Directorate of Operations, I said, I can't imagine trying to convince somebody that committing treason is a good idea, right? I mean, especially in some of these places that we go, that it's not just you, it's your family, right?
Yep.
They will track you down and literally kill them.
Yep.
I said, so I'll give you credit all day long for that. And he looked at me and said, and I will give you credit for having built communication systems for 35 years. So I'm not going to pick the frequency, right? Because sometimes we would get into arguments and be like, wait, I had to explain to you what a frequency was, and now you want to pick it. Like, let's respect our expertise, right? But generally, each one of us from our different backgrounds, and I think the fact that they hired me so late in my career is an example of that they were willing to take me in, right? And totally include me. I mean, there wasn't anything that was out of character, right?
And Dawn, just on that, is that unusual? Like, would most of the folks, especially at a senior level, they would be folks who spent a huge chunk of their professional life inside of the CIA? Or like you say, were you a bit of an outlier where they hired you into a senior position, and that is a bit unusual.
I'm definitely an outlier. I
Yeah.
was always an outlier. I changed
Yeah.
jobs so often. I'm good with that. I'm good with being an outlier. Yeah, as a matter of fact, in the Masterclass, John Brennan said to me, "You can't seem to hold a job," is my first question in an interview, and I just laughed and said, "I say that about myself." But yes, but yeah, I was definitely an outlier. But they totally. I mean, when it got down to it, you were focused on getting something that people said you couldn't do accomplished, right?
Yep.
And if you brought skin to that game, if you brought expertise, it didn't matter how long you'd been there, or like sometimes the most junior person, and this is in common with special forces as well. I'm having worked with those folks. Sometimes the most junior person is actually the one best qualified to do the tough tech because they're more current than the rest of us, right? And it didn't matter, right? There was room for everybody at the table, and everybody got listened to. Nobody got poo-pooed. And if that started, that I would be the first one. It's like, hang on a second, don't give me that. That's not how we do it here. Or we tried that before and it didn't work. It's like technology changes so fast
Yep.
that those two expressions have to go out the window, right? Because that is not relevant to the conversation. And it was funny. We were with a liaison partner, and we were brainstorming about something we had to do together. And they have a very hierarchical culture. I won't mention who it was. But we were talking about different ways we could do things, and we were literally in the front end of it. And so I was taking notes, and I suggested something, and one of my guys looked at me and he said, "Oh, that won't work." And he gave me the reason why. And I said, "Okay, never mind." And I crossed it out. Later, my counterpart came back and said, "He corrected you in front of all of us." And I was like, "That's right. And guess what? I'm not technical anymore." So he was absolutely right. And when he pointed it out, it's like, he said, "That would never happen here." I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." It was like, no, wait, right? You should let the best qualified people speak up and encourage them to speak up. So we really put a premium on that, and then made sure that there were things like ombuds and things like that if people felt like they weren't being heard. But I also did a lot of hands-on mentoring of my supervisors, sometimes to their chagrin. We had book clubs. We tried to spend a lot of time with people on leadership positions about creating an open culture so that mistakes weren't punished.
Yep.
They were like, let's learn from this and move on. Because otherwise you close the culture down, and then you don't get all the creativity and the goodness that comes with that.
And is there, in your role, and you've alluded to this, is creativity is extremely important. Is there a trick to being more creative in all the experiences you've had, and then trying to find people who can really think outside of the box, and in terms of what would have been required in that as part of that team? Is there a trick to all of that? And is there a way to teach creativity?
So I don't think there's a trick, but I will say that as part of the hiring process that CI goes through, we do there's like the initial screening kind of thing, right? But then we actually have people show up, and we give them scenarios to work through, and they get assessed on that. And a lot of it is exactly that. It's like closed room murder mystery, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you got to get this done. And here's the tools that you have, and here's your team, right? And most of them, like this, they're all actually like potential hirees.
Yeah.
And we team them up, and they don't know anything about each other other than a few, minutes they spend together. And we actually assess it. And it's partly their, how well they work with others, because everything's a team sport these days, but it's also their creativity, right? Is like, a lot of times we won't mention something, but they'll assume that because we said you can't do this, that there are all these other things that flow from that, but we intentionally are silent. And the people that ask questions are the ones that it's like, oh, okay, so this isn't interesting. This person is like trying to get out of the box that we put them in. And very often that was it, right? They weren't really in a box, but the way we posed the scenario, it felt like they were. And the ones who asked questions or just did it, that was even better, right? It was like, well, they didn't tell me I couldn't do this, so I'm doing it, right? And those are the people that we were like, yeah, them, that one, right? So we actually screened for it. But I also say that I think, so we had a preconceived kind of bias to find people that were creative and question ruled. I will also say that you need this environment that I talked about, where it's okay to just throw things out. And, somebody can say, oh, that's the law of physics saying that won't work. But generally we tried just to like everything could come out. And if somebody made a mistake, then it was like somebody would come alongside and say, okay, what did we learn here? We actually did, when I was there, we did a 1-day stand down because we had like 3 things that didn't work well in a row, all of which were completely foreseeable and preventable. Well, maybe not completely, right? It's one of those things where like, if you'd seen it, you would have done something. Nobody intentionally let it go the way that it did, right? Just to get together as a group and say, okay, so we're forgetting fundamentals here, right? Like you don't change the configuration 3 minutes before you ship something, right? I mean, it was things like that that we all know, but that in the heat of the moment, you're, trying to get to that lunch date or
Yep.
whatever it was, right? So it was trying to create that space that's like, hey, everybody should be able, and if you're in a rush, that's when you probably need more people, more eyes on the problem, not less eyes, right? Which is counterintuitive because if you're going fast, it's like like, oh, then you should have had a red team with you the whole way so that you could have asked them to spend 5 minutes on this before we had to go. So it was really trying constantly to reinforce that. How do you make the culture itself um, help you spot the things that could go wrong, but in the meantime, let creativity flow?
And do you think that the reason why the environment was in that way was because the stakes are so high? Like you say, if you're the senior person and you're saying something and somebody disagrees with it, again, in my world, the consequences really aren't that dramatic. No one's dying, right? But in your
Right.
world,
Yeah.
it's a totally different equation. Is that if somebody doesn't speak up and share their opinion and really start thinking outside of the box, this could have serious, serious consequences. And do you think that's what drives it? Is that just because the stakes are so high that you almost have no other option but to operate in this ultra, efficient or effective environment?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, there's something about, when you're sitting with the case officer or the tech officer who's going to implant that thing,
Yep.
um, in a country that they probably are not even supposed to be in, that they are not in their actual persona, and the ramifications can be arrest or worse.
Yep.
Uh, it's real and raw, right? And that's how, particularly the last reviews. I mean, when you're getting ready to do a serious op, it's you're sitting with the people that are gonna survive or thrive based on the conversation and the honesty of the conversation that occurs. And the same thing, when my folks very often met with assets to help explain to them how to use their communications gear or whatever. Um, like they don't want to be discovering at that point that the asset is functionally illiterate, right? I
Yep.
mean, it's all of those things.
Yep.
And so when we did these ops reviews, we called them, then yeah, you had to have that environment. And it was that, like, if we don't get this right, um, the best outcome was we'll never be able to get this. This collection, we'll never get this opportunity again. We won't be able to do this collection this way, right? And then that was the best outcome, right? The worst outcome would be literally somebody would be picked up or killed.
Yeah.
And that there, I did do some death notices while I was there, and that's uh, not something I ever expected to do as a technologist, and not something I ever wanted to have to do again. But it was, it was the reality of the job. So it also meant we would take a lot more risk, right? Just because of the kinds of things that we were trying to get clarity around were really, really important to national security or to national leadership. And so in order to take risk like that and have people feel comfortable, you have to be able to have those really hard conversations so that everybody felt like we did everything we knew how, particularly if something went wrong.
And is there a trick to dealing with the stress? Like, it just like what you're describing sounds like a very stressful environment as well. You've got people's lives depending on you. Again, you've got a super busy day. It's an all-encompassing job. Is there a trick to dealing with the stress?
I committed to long vacations where I could just, in like, if a week doesn't do it. It takes, I think the stats say it's got to be at least 10 days. So I tried to take 2 to 3 week vacations, and just really disconnect. The good
Yeah.
news was, because of the classified environment we operated in, that was a lot easier than it is for most people in business. Because like literally people had to call me, they would have to talk around it, right? Because I wasn't
see.
in a place where I could have a classified conversation. But I think this is why we put so much time and energy into leadership and people. I probably spent 35% of my time literally on people skills, because I had great deputies and they had great deputies and so on, right? So we really had a strong bench in terms of leadership, because I'd never wanted, that I can count on one hand the number of times I got calls like that. And it was around things that, I personally had to deal with because I had authorized something or whatever. I mean, it was that level of accountability.
Yep.
But for all the rest of that, it was, the folks on call. And we also, each of the organizations provided, they call them desk officers to the ops center. And they tended to be senior people that we empowered to make calls on our behalf. So we didn't have to get the call in the middle of the night.
Yep.
And so we did a lot of work, so that it was the burden of that kind of leadership was shared across as much of the organization as possible. And it also then, I mean, everybody knew it, right? It wasn't like
Yep.
some junior officer thought, I can slough this off and there's no consequences. It's like, you may be the last one who can stop something terrible from happening. And we treated them like that.
Now, you talked a little bit about building relationships, and in the masterclass you had done, this is where there's a lot of discussion as well, is about building relationships. You mentioned earlier, how do you convince somebody to commit treason? Because they're not just going to come after you; they're going to come after your family. You probably have a better understanding of what drives people than maybe anybody on the planet, just because of what what you do. For all of us in the in the private sector, what can we learn about building our own relationships with, whether it's people we work with, or like inside of the organization, or customers or suppliers, or whatever, whoever they may be. What's your thoughts on people building? What's the best way to go about that?
Yeah. So we had this framework that we used, and this is the cold analytic, like, not I love people approach, right?
Yep.
But so you have both, right? I like people, so I have a natural, I connect with people pretty easily. But when we're assessing and thinking about it, when we're being analytical about it, right? The framework is money, ideology, compromise, and ego. And it's called
In that
MICE.
order? In that order?
No,
Okay.
that's not necessarily. No, it's an easy way for it to fit the acronym.
Okay.
So if you can
Okay.
remember MICE, you can think of money,
see.
ideology, compromise, and ego. Actually, if you can align courses based on ideology, that's the strongest binding tie, right? That you're both passionate about something that's important, right? And then let's see. Money is actually one of the weaker ones, but it is one that is also employed, right? You have some common monetary interest. Ego, you feed an ego. And then compromise is actually the person is compromised in some way, and you use that. But I think people think that, so we did have this framework, and you could have those conversations. And we targeted people based on, those kinds of things. But I think, as I think about it, and I think about my experience in business, there were instances where, even though I didn't like somebody to spend a lot of time with somebody because of their ego, I needed them in order to close a deal.
Yep.
So I work with them, right? You figure out how to work with them. If there's an ideological basis, then those are great, right? I just like this person. It's a great reason. They believe the same things I do. Easy days, right?
And Dawn, sorry to interrupt. If you go through each one of those, is it from an individual perspective, would they be motivated by multiple ones? Like, if you have, let's say, somebody who is motivated by ideology, do the money, compromise, ego, do those go way down the list? Or is it ones where, everybody is relatively balanced? They're all motivated by different elements, and that they're all kind of near the top, or like I said, on the flip side, does one of those like completely dominate the rest when it comes down to assessing a person?
So people are all different. So what I'll
Yeah.
say is it depends, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the people that were ideologically convinced, I mean, it's heartbreaking. We would have assets say, I want my daughter to grow up in an environment different than the one that I did.
Yeah.
Right. And wouldn't actually take any money, zero.
Wow.
Um, and then we had others where, it was a combination of money and ego, kinds of things. And those were the problematic ones, right? It was like monies can go to the highest bidder, and the ego thinks that they should be, well recompensed, regardless of, scurrilous behavior. And those ones. So yes, if we had a preference, ideological was like number one all day, every day, but you don't get to pick your assets necessarily from that perspective, right? But if we had a choice, right? If we had a choice between two potential assets that could help with reporting, and one was ideologically aligned, and the other one just wanted money, I can tell you which one we would bonus on every day. And it really
Yeah.
was. It depends on the person. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I guess the other thing too is with money, someone could always pay a higher amount. When it comes to something like ideological, there is nothing higher. You know what I mean? Like it would be harder,
Right.
maybe perhaps to sway them, I guess, off of their perspective. Uh,
Absolutely.
so the next question I want to ask you is, like, there's so much going on in the world today, and we consume so much of our news, and so much of our information through the internet, through CNN, Fox, whatever your favorite channel is. But the information that you have and the knowledge that you have, again, you're probably one of these folks, like less than 1% of the people on the planet actually know what you know. Um, like for all of us who watch the news every day, what would you tell us in terms of like the truth? Are we getting the truth, Don? Or is it, what, like you're getting a version of the truth, and really what is again, just like it, like there's just so much going on. I'm just interested to
Yeah.
get your perspective on that.
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. I mean, my first kind of, seat of the pants answer is, who are you getting your news from? Uh, because I think that matters a lot. I think that, there's, real challenges to getting, facts in front of people.
Yep.
And, there's a real, challenge in terms of critical thinking skills. And I think it's something that we should all be concerned about in liberal democracies, because I think that, that is absolutely integral to having a viable, government.
Yep.
And I think critical thinking skills, like if we don't see a unit step function improvement in those, we have bigger problems facing us, right? But with respect to your, how do I sleep at night? So I get my news through a variety of sources. I don't have any, special relationship with the agency anymore. So I'm not seeing intelligence reports. And it would be inappropriate for me to do that. But I think what I do is I have a healthy, skepticism.
Yep.
And also, unfortunately, one of the things you get, I think, working in national security is you also go to dark corners, or you explore dark corners that maybe the general population doesn't. Yeah, thinking that a leader would build when I can talk about would build chemical weapons and then use them on his own population. Yeah, how can we reconcile that, right? And the
Yep.
idea that if we negotiate, like, what's the basis of negotiation for somebody who behaves that way, right? I mean, it just makes my head hurt, right?
Yep.
But I will also say that I often enough see him, and it's with the story about, like the asset that I talked about that said, I want my daughter to have something different. There is something about liberal democracies and the truth that we try to speak or that we try to live out. Like, we're not trying to, expand or, whatever, that I think resonates with people, at some deep level.
Yep.
And I think that, that, and I also think you wouldn't do this business if you weren't a bit of an optimist. And I don't mean Susie Sunshine optimist, but like, we can make a difference, right? If I didn't think that all that time, all that energy I expended, hadn't changed outcomes at some level, right?
Yep.
Then I would probably felt a lot less called and a lot less pressed about national security. And I also say, I have grandkids, I have kids and grandkids. I would be a liar if I said I weren't concerned about them. But I will also say that what I saw in my job, and even today, with the work that I do, these next generations are amazing.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it's not like my generation is going to disappear and there's nobody behind us that has the values and the work ethic and the skill sets and the communications abilities and the appreciation of the other. like we sell ourselves short, and we're not kind to our children because look, if my kids aren't that way, then that 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 kind of rests with me, right? I mean,
Yep.
nature versus nurture, right? But I got to help shape that.
Yep.
And same thing for our grandchildren. And I think if you start counting, the next generations out, with the opportunities they've had, the things they've experienced, even the bad things, right?
Yep.
That we are shortchanging that generation. And so I'm an optimist because, I was that kid, 50 years ago.
Yep. Do you worry about how do you think about AI? Do you think about it as a great opportunity or a great risk at the end of the day?
I think it's a great opportunity. The work that I know is already being done in terms of aids for analysts, right? The sidecar, or for programmers, right? I
Yep.
mean, it really takes kind of the mundane. I've sat with analysts just because I'm fascinated with what they do, and to a certain extent, and you are an analyst as well, right?
Yep.
Um, it takes how much time do we spend even I use ChatGPT and Gemini and all of that now, and I'll ask you questions, and then I want to go look at the references, right?
Yep.
That's a whole different thing than trying to Google one at a time, right? Like, okay, who's the number one cloud service provider in the world, and who's number two, and who's number three, right? I can just ask a question now, and I
Yep.
get an answer with reference list, and that's what the analysts are experiencing, right? It's like they can get that, and then this is what I love about our analysts, like somebody who's studied, Xi Jinping for 30 years can ask that question and say, this is what they missed, right?
Yep.
Or here's information we have, to your point, that the rest of the world may not have, that changes slightly or significantly how we think about what he's thinking, right? And I think I am, at least from a national security perspective, will it be abused? Absolutely. I mean, I feel a little abused already, frankly. Like I tried to buy internet service for my mom,
Oh yeah.
and like I was paying the bill, right? But I wanted to get gifted for her because it was just like overwhelming, right? So that we could do like, Zoom calls and things easily. And like I couldn't, first of all, it took me forever to get to a person. And when I finally got to a person, like they had no way to make the billing system work that way.
Yeah.
Like
Wow.
literally, they couldn't solve the problem because the IT people had put so many guardrails in to make sure nobody did something nefarious, that this gift I wanted to give my mom was so, I think more and more that like, and for those of us that are somewhat technically competent, right, trying to get through that, hit the button, get another recording that says hit the next button or whatever. It's that part. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Do you
And the
think we
brand.
and do you think there's a risk? You mentioned chemical weapons, and that and what somebody who's nefarious can do with that. They can do a lot. They can cause a lot of damage. Do you worry as well with if some of this technology gets in the wrong hands as to what somebody could do, say with artificial intelligence, or we've been lucky so far. Something like nuclear weapons. There's only what is it, 7 or 8 countries that actually have the technology surrounding nuclear weapons, and that's probably 7 or 8 countries too many, frankly, that have that technology. We'd probably be better off if that technology didn't exist, frankly. But does that concern you based on what you know? Because again, you're gathering information on all these countries that probably want to do harm to, call it countries in North America or other places. Um, does that keep you up at night in terms of what happens if some of this technology falls in the wrong hands?
No, but let me tell you why. Probably not an answer you'd expect. Um, as long as the US and other partners continue to lead in these fields of technology and are the ones establishing norms,
Yep.
um, through treaty or through working groups or through standards bodies or whatever the thing is, right? Then I think we can work our way through this, right? What I get more concerned about, and this is why the focus on, you know, non-liberal democracies or non-democratic institutions is that it's not so clear that they will adhere to those same values.
Yep.
And so I think that's why the big push on the US and US and our partners has to continue to lead technologically in these areas so that we can talk about the norms of behavior and we can establish, guardrails without preventing innovation that kind of changes the world, right?
Yep.
And I'll use a bad example. Yes, I get your point on nuclear. And we talked about Challenger. People died,
Yep.
but when we take back any of the innovations that came as a result of the scientific exploration, like my refrigeration, right? All of the things that come from that, and that have significantly improved our quality of life. Would we take those things back because of how some of them were birthed? I think the answer is no, but I think it's really important that people with similar values to us are the ones leading those fields.
Yeah, and human nature is to
Yeah.
continue to innovate. Is to
Yes,
never stand still. And if you were to take those things away, you're taking away what it is to be human to some degree. Is
that's right.
Humans
That
are not going to
creativity
stand
piece
still.
we talked about. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Here's another kind of random question for you, Don. We've got a bunch of finance people who would be listening to this, and they would be keen to know. You obviously have an engineering background. Where do the finance folks? Is there a role for the finance folks in the CIA? If someone's sitting there saying, you know what, man, I'm not happy in my job here. I'm patriotic. I want to do my part. Is there a spot for them in the CIA to make a difference?
Absolutely. Bring it.
Yeah.
It's no, so follow the money. I mean, that was one of
Yeah.
our catchphrases inside, right? If you follow the money, then, it takes money to finance terrorist operations, for example, right? And
Yep.
terrorist organizations. There's a reason that, people are trying to figure out how to swipe Bitcoin, right? They're
Yep.
trying to finance things outside of the monetary system because the monetary system has been to a certain extent regulated to prevent those things, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's like we have serious chops in following money. And I'll say that the bias that I've seen is if you've got experience, you get to do the mission side. If you don't have experience, you end up doing making sure that our books reconcile because it's taxpayer money. And
Yep.
then you can move into that, right? So we want
I
you to
see.
have experience. So yes, if you've got experience, whoops. Oh, I just poured water on my computer. Sorry. Um, Hopefully that's okay. If you've got experience, yeah, bring it. I think it'd be awesome.
And you don't have to be a lifelong CIA person. Like they would hire people from industry to come into a position based on your, again, you don't have to be a college grad, let's say, with just coming out, but you could be someone with 15 or 20 years experience in industry. Like CIA would be interested in something like that. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we prefer people that have experience. Maybe not as much experience as I did. I was kind of out of pattern for that. But yes, very often they'll say, work for a few years and then come back to us because they want those tradecraft chops, tech chops. Yeah.
And what would you characterize? Again, you worked on both sides. What would you characterize as the biggest difference, say, between working in private industry at AOL versus working in government? Is there like one or two things that would really point out as a difference?
I think you talked about it. I think the kind of engagement at the national level and the commitment to, preserving liberal democracies.
Yeah.
My friends that I grew up with that are now, high up in tech companies, to a large extent have been kind of out of like, yeah, we're glad you do that, Dawn, right? Like, and it's great stories. We love your stories, but I'm over here making money, or building this great thing or whatever. So I think that's one of the big differentiators between the two. But other than that, I think very, very similar in terms of deep technical expertise, love the mission, But I did notice that, I mean, when I ran product at AOL, we talked a lot about, making the internet available for my mom, my poor mom.
Yep.
I kept using her as the example, right? It's kind of different than making sure, Assad doesn't use chemical weapons on his population. Yeah.
And the fact that one is for profit and one is not for profit, do you see, is there critical, do you notice any differences there, or just in your role, there really isn't, you don't see a big difference there?
No, that's another really good point. I should have addressed, Scott. Thank you. Yes. I mean, the quarterly earnings calls I always found, and this is my bias, kind of soulless.
Yep.
Right? It's like, I've asked CEOs, what's your vision for the company? And some of them are just stop, like they're locked up. And it's like, well, normally I get asked how my next earnings call is going to be. It's like, well, yeah. And my attitude is if you have a vision for the company, your next quarterly earnings call will be just fine. Right.
Yep.
So that was, you're right. That's one of the big differences is we had the luxury. We planned operations that we knew it would take 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10 years to get
Yeah.
into operation. Right. And we had that luxury because we had, like, if it was important enough and it would make a difference to get that information even 10 years from now, we had the luxury of doing that. And that was not my experience in commercial tech.
Yeah, another question for it just came to me now is when there's a change in government, like the Democrats or the Republicans, they switch back and forth. When that happens, is there a shift do you notice a shift at the, call it the management level at CIA, or does it just keep going on and maybe things get tweaked a little bit? But is that not a big deal when that were to happen?
It changes from administration, but there's always, kind of I'll say a pause of some sort.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, some of them are really long, and that's kind of maddening. I'll say,
Yep.
because it's like, hey, mission's percolating here, right? And it takes a little while, to come in to be the director of the CIA. And for example, the first time you see covert action,
Yep.
right? That's a bit of a swallow, right? I
Yep.
mean, and you know that if things don't go well, you will be the scapegoat sitting in the chair or taking the hit because you deserve it, right? Whatever, whichever way it goes. Um, and so those transitions, there's always some kind of hit, and it doesn't stop. I'll say the people in PACs are like the top tier, like the job that I was in.
Yep.
The people that are doing the day to day, one of the things we really worked on was like, just keep doing your job. It's going to be fine. That's what we're paid to do. We'll figure this out. You get your thing done. Right.
Yep.
And so, yeah, there's every single administration change. There's always, I'll call it a hiccup that lasts either a long time or a short time. But there is, and just bringing in a new leader, they have
Yep.
a different way they want to consume information. They have a different way to ask questions. The more interaction there is early on, the better you get at gauging that. And of course, because CIA specializes in um, figuring out how to deal with people, that's one of the super skills.
Yep.
There's a lot of that, like, early engagement to figure out, okay, so this is how this person likes to get information. They like email, they don't like email, they like PowerPoint, they don't like PowerPoint. I mean, all of those things, just the human condition.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, Now we got to talk a little bit about the masterclass as well. I think it's the only kind of masterclass right now that's kind of run by, former CIA folks. Why did you want to do the masterclass? Like, how did that kind of come about? The masterclass with your two colleagues.
Yeah. So they reached out to us and they interviewed us about doing it.
Okay.
I have no idea what the impetus was for why CIA. And of course, the agency was actually very supportive. They wanted us to represent, because I work for a boss who used to say, we have to keep secrets, but that doesn't mean we need to be mysterious. Right. And I love that. I think that's
Yep.
exactly right on. And then when I found out who I was going to do it with, and I got to say, the folks from Masterclass, for every, I was figuring it out in prep for this session, but for every hour of Masterclass that you see, there were probably 10 hours of
Wow.
filming. And for
Wow.
every 10 hours of filming, there were probably 10 hours with us doing Q&A and kind of figuring out what we could or should talk about, what was interesting. So we did a lot of back and forth and prep for that. And I think the thing and I talked to both Brian and Michael about this, what we really felt was the need to represent well the community that we came from. We felt a lot of pressure, not so much to do it, but that I really wanted people to get a sense of what kinds of technologists and scientists that we had at the agency, and what made them tick, and how important they were to the mission. And hopefully that came across.
Well,
Was
I think what it does is, again, if the CIA's goal, I'm sure, is to hire the best and the brightest, and I think for anybody, a lot of us, we don't know much about the CIA other than what we see in movies and watch on TV. And with everything going on in this world, especially for folks that might be not too happy in their current job because they're not having something, it's not fulfilling for them. You watch a masterclass and you realize the work that you're doing and the difference that you're making. And then the fact that, again, they hire people who may have had lots of industry experience. Like, it's just a win-win-win all around for the CIA. Obviously there's things you can't say, but the goal is, to some degrees, to educate and to, it convinced people to, hey, if you're not happy in your job and you want to, make a difference, here's a place you can go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And funny that you say that the women who did costume, but clothing and makeup, they both said, "Hey, we're kind of interested. Could we talk to
Yeah.
you about this?" So, yeah, to your point, right? That's we were trying to demystify and help people understand, and also just understand, we're not a bunch of cowboys and going rogue, spying on the American public. That is like you could. That's one of the few things you could literally go to jail for. So at the CIA. So yeah, that was a big part of what we were trying to communicate.
Well,
So thanks for that.
well, and I think you're bang on. I think, again, a lot of people, we talked a little bit about the news. If your goal of reading the news is just to read the headline, you're not doing it properly, and
Yeah.
again, I think a lot of this stuff, you can get a headline that just does terrible damage. And yet it's just not factually correct. With everything, there's way more to a story than a headline. And the one thing too is there's always two sides to every story. No matter what it
Right.
is, there's always going to be two sides to it. And the
Yeah.
work that you do is just the stakes are just so high. Like, I make a mistake in my job, it's not a big deal at all. No one's going to care. Maybe I get fired. That's the worst that can happen. The stakes that you're playing with are, and it's night and day. You can't compare the two, right? So
Oh, when I tell my family, yeah, it is. And what I tell my family is, would you have somebody chew your meat before you swallow it? And they kind of look at me and it's like, all right, so you're going to take whatever this commentator says. So I'm in the habit of, and it pains me sometimes, but I try to listen to like the far right and the far left,
yep.
knowing that someplace in the middle is probably where truth lies. That's a terrible, ugly analogy, but that's what I think, because I think too many of us let somebody else chew our meat to make a decision, right? And it's like, no, 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 no. If it's something you care about, and hopefully we all care about some aspect of our government, then it's your responsibility to dig in slightly further than the latest fill in the blank that you listen to.
Yeah, and you alluded to it earlier about one of the big benefits of AI is it allows you to get through information a lot faster than,
Yep.
you think about you roll the clock back to the 80s, you're talking about textbooks and there was no internet, right? For the vast majority of the population. Now you can't say that the information is not out there. It's out there. You just got to find it.
And you got to expend a little energy, not even a lot
Absolutely.
of energy. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah, for sure.
when you were building the masterclass, was it hard to hone in on a topic? Like, you mentioned all the time you spent planning and things like that. I can imagine the list of topics would be like, maybe hundreds potentially of potential topics and you've got to, I think the masterclass was what, like 2 hours or something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, it was short. Like, it wasn't like there's
Yep.
other masterclasses that are like 10 hours long. This one was
Right.
one of those short ones.
Yep.
Trying to get all that down to like 90 minutes, 2 hours must have been a huge challenge.
Yeah, and this is where I will also say that I have huge respect for actors now after this, as well as production teams. I mean, being filmed for 10 hours or whatever it
Oh my
was,
God.
literally, they were feeding me one-liners for like that social media stuff. And with, it was like, if it was more than 3 words, I was like, I don't have any brain cells left. Like, it's going to have to wait. So, but the masterclass, the production team was amazing. And they were the ones that took all of that. And because literally we probably spent 200 hours, culling through, or we regurgitated like stories and information. And they were the ones that said, okay, so here's the common themes we got from the three of you. Here's how we're going to talk about that. And then they did. And then we did a lot of filming, and then they used, the best of the best. So,
I see.
yeah, they did a lot of pruning to get to where we were. And then of course we did have to be conscious of classification.
And then maybe just to wrap it up, how do you spend your time today? I saw one thing on LinkedIn that there's a documentary about women spies, and I can't remember the lady that was mentioned. But I did some research on her. It was someone, I think, in World War II or something like that. And she was just a total like badass, like in terms of what she did was maybe just, I don't know if you're involved in that, but maybe just talk a little bit about what keeps you busy today.
Yeah, so I do a ton of boards, as you
Okay.
might imagine. I love, yeah. So I'm on the Google Public Sector board, and I'm on a number of startup boards. I do a lot of work with Blackstone. And I also I still have that service gene. So I'm a commissioner of the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech, which is about to release our final report, March, wait for that. But yes, I do. At least one of the organizations I'm involved in that's trying to highlight women's contribution to national security is called Iron Butterfly,
Okay.
and they are in post production. So, I don't know how long that'll take. It's all bootstrapped, so that post production is expensive. So we're working through that. But yeah, I still have a real passion. I still teach a class for my old outfit in leadership because I just love them. I love the people that work there. So what I tell people that pay me is that I'm trying to figure out how to use your money to solve national security problems. And they all laugh and they're good with that. Because I still have this passion of, my life's work has been around, creating things that change outcomes. And so the third chapter of my life, I'll say, is about leveraging relationships and creating instances where people can impact others in positive ways.
And do you miss the CIA? I could imagine the adrenaline levels while working there, can get pretty high. I could imagine, I could imagine the nature of the job would be pretty cool. Do you miss that? Do you miss that environment?
I do, but that's why I do all of these other things because I get to, go hang out with the cool kids once a week every quarter for this
Yeah.
class. Um, and I get my little bit of injection, but also pour into them because it's like a break for them, and we can talk about anything. And I'm not in the command anymore, so I'm not in the chain, so they can say anything, and I'm not going to run back and tell anybody that they said it, right? So it's a safe spot. So I get my little injection there, but I also I feel like I maybe have more influence in getting people interested in national security from the outside than I actually did from the inside when I was all consumed with the job. So it's, every stage of life is a balance. And I feel really fortunate that I got to do it and that I get to do things like this with you, Scott.
Oh, that's great. Well, Dawn, thank you very much for taking the time. It's a very, very interesting discussion. You bring a very unique perspective for sure. But thank you very much for taking the time. We very much appreciate it. Thank you. Well, that wraps another episode of CSI Chat, and I really wanted to thank everybody for listening. If you want to keep up to date on CSI Chat, I would encourage everyone to join our CSI Chat LinkedIn group and or follow us on Twitter/X under CSI Chat. With that, I will get you out of here on a high note with some music, and thanks again.
Welcome to CSI Chat, where every topic's fair game. From finance to mysteries, we'll never be the same. Our host an accountant with a knack for a joke. We'll dive into the details and laugh until we choke. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. CSI Chat, where the numbers meet the fun. We'll explore every subject under the sun. From taxes to true crime, we'll find the hidden clue. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. See the case through. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. We'll solve it with some humor and go the extra mile. Got a question about investments or a tale of deceit? We'll break it down with laughter and never miss a beat. No need for serious faces, just a sharp wit and a smile. With humor and some spreadsheets, we'll see the case through. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic set us free. Tune in every week for a mix of win facts with a clever accountant who's got your back. We'll laugh and we'll learn and solve the mystery on CSI Chat, where the topic makes us friends. CSI Chat is the podcast you'll adore. With our accountant hosts, you'll always want more. So grab your headphones and join the fun on CSI Chat, where the mystery's never done. We'll see the